Let me begin, not with an answer, but with a pause. There was a time when I believed that leadership meant certainty. That if you were in front, you had to know, you had to speak clearly, had to sound very sure. And somewhere in that belief, we forgot something very human. It's not possible to know everything. And yet, we kept pretending that we leaders had all the answers. Over the years, across classrooms, institutions, conversation with the officers and professionals, especially the young minds, I've noticed something. The leaders people remember are not the ones who spoke the most. They are the ones who listened, the ones who paused, the ones who, at the right moment, said quietly, I don't know. Not as a weakness, but as a truth. Actually, the problem is the corporate word, the uniform word, the academic word, all of them, they reward certainty. We are trained to appear confident, to sound decisive, to avoid hesitation. But leadership was never about appearing strong. It was about being real enough for people to trust you. And trust, I've learned, doesn't come from perfection. It comes from honesty. Authentic leadership is a misunderstood phrase. It's not about being informal. It's not about being emotionally expressive all the time. Authentic leadership is alignment. What you believe, how you decide, how you speak, how you act, especially no one is watching. Bill George, he spoke about four pillars of leadership, and let me simplify them for you. An authentic leader knows who they are, is not afraid of being seen, listens before concluding, and acts from value, not from convenience. That is it. No drama, no performance, just integrity in motion. Now let's talk about the sentence we avoid. I don't know. Most leaders fear it because they think it reduces authority. But in reality, it redefines your authority. When you say, I don't know, you stop pretending, you invite thinking, you open doors. Research tells us that leaders who admit uncertainty are trusted more. But even without research, we know this instinctively. We trust people who are honest about their limits. There is always a difference between confidence and ego. Ego says, I must know because I am in charge. Leadership says, I am responsible enough to learn. The strongest leaders I've met never rushed to the answers. They listened, they reflected, and they allowed silence. And in that silence, better decisions were born. Now look at Satya Nadella. He didn't transform Microsoft by asserting dominance. He just changed the entire culture by shifting one idea from knowing to learning. A leader who says, teach me, show me, help me understand, creates organizations that think. Most people think empathy and clarity are opposites. No, it is not. You can be firm and yet compassionate, decisive and yet human. That is authentic leadership. Now, vulnerability is also often misunderstood. It doesn't mean sharing everything. It doesn't mean emotional overflow. It means being truthful about where you stand. When leaders acknowledge uncertainties, team doesn't lose confidence. They gain permission to think, permission to speak, permission to contribute. As leaders, we carry so many myths silently, like that authenticity makes you soft, that transparency weakens your command, that experience automatically makes you authentic. None of that is true. Authenticity requires courage. It's easier to pretend than to be real. So, how do we practice this? Not through slogans, but through habits. Pause before responding. Reflect on why a decision feels uncomfortable. Ask instead of asserting. Admit gaps early. Invite different perspectives. And sometimes simply say, I don't have all the answers yet. That sentence builds space. We are entering into an age of intelligence, artificial intelligence. Machines will always know more, process faster, predict better. But leadership will always remain human because leadership is not a data, it's judgment. And judgment comes from value, empathy, moral clarity. In uncertain times, people don't want infallible leaders, they want honest ones. Leadership is not about standing taller, it's about standing truer. The courage to say, I don't know, is actually the courage to learn. And learning is the only sustainable authority. So the next time you feel the pressure to sound certain, pause. Ask yourself, am I protecting my image or my integrity? Because the strongest leadership move is not having all the answers, it's about being real enough to seek them.